In Spanish, Manzanar means apple orchard. Great stretches of Owens Valley were once green with orchards and alfalfa fields. It had been a desert ever since its water started flowing into South Los Angeles, sometime during the 20s. But a few rows of untended parent apple trees were still growing there when the camp opened, where a shallow water table had kept them alive. In the spring of 1943, we moved to Block 28, right up next to one of the old pear orchards. That's where we stayed until the end of the war, and those trees stand in my memory for the turning of our life in camp, from the outrageous to the tolerable. Papa pruned and cared for the nearest trees. Late that summer, we picked the fruit green and stored it in a root cellar he had dug under our new barracks. At night, the wind through the leaves would sound like the surf had sounded in Ocean Park, and while drifting off to sleep, I could almost imagine we were still living by the beach. Mama had set up this move. Block 28 was also close to the camp hospital. For the most part, people lived there who had easy access to it. Mama's connection was her job as a dietitian. A whole half of one barracks had fallen empty when another family relocated. Mama hustled us there almost before they'd snapped their suitcases shut. For all the pain it caused, the loyalty oath finally did speed up the relocation program. One result was a gradual easing of the congestion in the barracks. A shrewd house hunter like Mama could set things up fairly comfortably by Manzanar standards if she kept her eyes open. But you had to move fast. As soon as a word got around that so-and-so had been cleared to leave, there would be some kind of tribal restlessness, a nervous rise in the level of neighborhood gossip as wives jockeyed for position to see who would get the empty cubicles. In Block 28, we doubled our living space. 4 rooms for the 12 of us. Ray and Woody walled them with sheetrock. We had ceilings this time, and linoleum floors of solid maroon. You had 3 colors to choose from: maroon, black, and forest green, and there was plenty of it by this time. Some families could vie with one another for the most elegant floor designs, obtaining a roll of each color from the supply shed, cutting it into diamonds, squares, or triangles, shining it with heating oil, and then leaving their doors open so that passers-by could admire the handiwork. Papa brought his still with him when he moved. He set it up behind the door where he continued to brew his own sake and brandy. He wasn't drinking as much now, though. He spent a lot of time outdoors. Like many of the older issei men, he didn't have a regular job in camp. He puttered. He had been working hard for 30 years, and, bad as it was for him in some ways, camp did allow him time to dabble with hobbies he could never have found time for otherwise. Once the first year's turmoil cooled down, the authorities started letting us outside the wire for recreation. Papa used to hike along the creeks that channeled down from the base of the Sierras. He brought back chunks of driftwood, and he would pass long hours sitting on the steps, carving myrtle limbs into benches, table legs, and lamps, filling our room with bits of gnarled, polished furniture. He hauled stones in off the desert and built a small rock garden outside our doorway, with succulents and a patch of moss. Near it, he laid flat stepping stones leading to the stairs. He also painted watercolors. Until this time, I had not known he could paint. He loved to sketch the mountains. If anything made that country habitable, it was the mountains themselves, purple when the sun dropped, and so sharply etched in the morning light the granite dazzled almost more than the bright snow lacing it. The nearest peak rose 10,000 feet higher than the valley floor, with Whitney, the highest, just off to the south. They were important for all of us, but especially for the issei. Whitney reminded Papa of Fujiyama, and it gave him the same kind of spiritual sustenance. The tremendous beauty of those peaks was inspirational, as so many natural forms are to the Japanese. The rocks outside our doorway could be those mountains in miniature. They also represented those forces in nature, those powerful and inevitable forces that cannot be resisted, reminding a man that sometimes we must simply endure, which cannot be changed. Subdued, resigned, Papa's life, all of our lives, took on a pattern that would hold for the duration of the war. Public shows of resentment pretty much spent themselves over the loyalty oath crises. Shikata ga nai again became the motto, but under altered circumstances. We had to be endured was the climate, the confinement, the steady crumbling away of family life. But the camp itself had become more livable. The government provided for our physical needs. My parents and older brothers and sisters, like most of the internees, accepted their lot and did what they could to make the best out of a bad situation. "We're here," Woody would say. "We're here, and there's no use moaning about it forever." Gardens had sprung up everywhere, in the fire breaks between the rows of barracks, rock gardens, vegetable gardens, cactus and flower gardens. People who lived in Owens Valley during the war still remember the flowers and lush greenery they could see from the highway as they drove past the main gate. The soil around Manzanar is alluvial and very rich, with water siphoned off from the Los Angeles-bound aqueduct. A large farm was under cultivation just outside the camp, providing the mess halls with lettuce, corn, tomatoes, eggplant, string beans, horseradish, and cucumbers. Near Block 28, some of the men, who had been professional gardeners, built a small park with mossy nooks, ponds, waterfalls, and curved wooden bridges. Sometimes in the evenings, we could walk down the raked gravel paths. You could face away from the barracks, look past the tiny rapids toward the darkening mountains, and for a while, not be a prisoner at all. You could hang suspended in some odd, almost lovely land you could not escape, yet almost didn't want to leave. As the months at Manzanar turned into years, it became a world unto itself, with its own logic and familiar ways. In time, staying there seemed far simpler than moving once again to another unknown place. It was as if the war were forgotten, our reason for being there forgotten. The present, the little bit of busy work you had right in front of you, became the most urgent thing. In such a narrowed world, in order to survive, you learn to contain your rage, your despair, and you try to recreate as well as you can your normality, some sense of things continuing. The fact that America had accused us or excluded us or imprisoned us, or whatever it might be called, did not change the kind of world we wanted. Most of us were born in this country. We had no other models. Those parks and gardens lent in an Asian character, but in most ways it was totally equipped American small town, complete with schools, churches, Boy Scouts, beauty parlors, neighborhood gossip, fire and police departments, glee clubs, softball leagues, Abbott and Costello movies, tennis courts, and traveling shows. I still remember an Indian who turned up one Sunday, billing himself as a Sioux chief, wearing bear claws and head feathers. In the fire break, he sang songs and danced his tribal dances while hundreds of us watched. In our family, while Papa puttered, Mama made her daily rounds to the mess halls, helping young mothers with their feeding, planning diets for the various ailments people suffered from. She wore a bright yellow, long-billed sun hat she had made herself and always kept stiffly starched. Afternoons, I would see her coming from blocks away, heading home, her tiny figure warped by heat waves, and that bonnet, a yellow flower, wavering in the glare. In their disagreement over serving the country, Woody and Papa had struck a kind of compromise. Papa talked him out of volunteering. Woody waited for the army to induct him. Meanwhile, he clerked in the co-op general store. Keo, nearly 13 by this time, looked forward to the heavy winds. They moved the sand around and uncovered obsidian arrowheads he could sell to old men in camp for 50 cents apiece. Ray, a few years older, played in the six-man touch football league, sometimes against Caucasian teams who would come in from Lone Pine or Independence. My sister, Lillian, was in high school and singing with a hillbilly band called the Sierra Stars, jeans, cowboy hats, 2 guitars, and a tub bass. And my oldest brother, Bill, led a dance band called the Jive Bombers, brass and rhythm, with cardboard fold-out music stands lettered JB. Dances were held every weekend in one of the recreation halls. Bill played trumpet and took vocals on Glenn Miller arrangement as such tunes as In the Mood, String of Pearls, and Don't Fence Me In. He didn't sing Don't Fence Me In out of protest, as if trying quietly to mock the authorities. It just happened to be a hit song one year, and they all wanted to be an up-to-date American swing band. They would blast it out in recreation barracks full of bobby-soxed jitterbug couples. Oh, give me land, lots of land, under starry skies above. Don't fence me in. Let me ride through the wide, open country that I love. Pictures of the band in their bow ties and jackets appeared in the high school yearbook of 1943 to 44, along with pictures of just about everything else in the camp that year. It was called Our World. In its pages, you could see kids with armloads of books, wearing cardigan sweaters and walking past rows of tar-papered shacks. You see chubby girl yell leaders, pom-poms flying as they leap with glee. You read about the school play called Growing Pains, the story of a typical American home, in this case, that of the McIntyres. They see their boy and girl tossed into the normal, awkward growing stage, but can offer little assistance or direction in their turbulent course. With Shoji Katayama as George McIntyre, Takuta Ando as Terry McIntyre, and Mrs. McIntyre played by Kazuko Nagai. All the class pictures were in there from the 7th grade through 12th, with individual headshots of seniors, their names followed by the names of high schools that they have graduated from on the outside. Theodore Roosevelt, Thomas Jefferson, Herbert Hoover, Sacred Heart. You see pretty girls on bicycles, chicken yards full of fat pullets, patients back-tilted in dental chairs, lines of laundry, and finally, two large blow-ups, the first of a high tower with a searchlight against a Sierra backdrop, and the next a two-page